Благодарим нашу аудиторию за вопросы и за активное участие.
Thank you very much for submitting all these exciting questions. I am happy to welcome to the stage our next speaker, Tapiwa Chiwewe. His journey in science started with observation of nature. He wasn't an expert, but he decided to create a project to combat atmospheric pollutions. And now it grew into Omnien that creates environmental solutions for mining. Please prepare yourselves for an exciting presentation on ESG and AI and its contribution to building a sustainable future. The founder of Omnien, Tapiwa Chiwewe, AI and ESG navigating the intersection for a sustainable future.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you here today, all the way from South Africa, to speak about this topic of AI and ESG that is transforming the business landscape today. And I'm sure a lot of you are really interested to see how you can navigate the intersection between artificial intelligence and ESG. You know, thinking of AI and sustainability, I was just remarking to myself how over the last decade, it's been a golden decade for artificial intelligence. I was just thinking about some of the work I've done over the years. A little over a decade ago, I was doing some work on monitoring water quality around the country. And out of curiosity, I just asked myself, would it be possible to predict the levels of water pollution based off of all the data that we're collecting? And it turns out that it was possible. Later on, based off of more societal need, I did some work on air quality management. This had to do with taking these coupled climate chemistry models, combining them with machine learning, and lo and behold, we could perform air quality forecasting at an unprecedented resolution and scale. And if you think about it today, as we speak about ESG, it just shows how the field has really come full circle. Nowadays, AI is being used for business-critical applications, no more than it is for ESG. Let me just find out from you in the room, how many of you have got a ESG strategy in your companies, or you're working on something related to ESG? Just by a show of hands. Okay, so not a lot, but hopefully by the end of this talk, I would have convinced you on the merits of ESG and AI. So let's begin by setting the stage, right? So let's put things into context. Why ESG? Why are we so concerned about ESG? So in the world we are in today, there are all sorts of global challenges. We think about climate change. There's lots of geopolitical tension, social inequality, and the nature of these challenges actually call for organizations to look beyond the traditional metrics of profit and loss in order to address these challenges. And also, society is calling on business leaders and organizations to address these challenges. So ESG is really a framework for assessing a company's impact on the world, and to take a look at how it can further its own long-term sustainability. So there are three primary factors. E is for environment, how sustainable a company's operations are. This includes things such as the carbon footprint, waste management, and so forth, environmental impact. S is how a company treats different groups of people. This includes its suppliers, its employees, and various other stakeholders. And a lot of different practices come into play here. So for instance, how well it is hiring, its different hiring practices, and so forth. And the governance aspect has to do with how a company polices itself. So this includes things such as executive compensation, how it makes decisions within the company, risk management. All of this comes into play. Now, taking a look at an ESG timeline, what we see is that way back, as far back as 1759, Some of you may know this book by Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, right? He also wrote a book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And in that book, he speaks about the importance of shared values and transparency when it comes to ethical capitalism. Later on, there's this company in 1913, Rarick Pacific, which actually started creating sustainable packaging. And a lot of the principles that we're following back then actually align with what we'd consider modern-day ESG principles. Later on, post-World War II, there was another economist, Milton Friedman, and what he spoke about was the importance of shareholder primacy. So that's when the idea about maximizing shareholder profits came into play. And he was saying that when it comes to environmental and social concerns, these should rather be left to governments. And it made sense. Post-World War II, there was a lot of trust in governments, and governments had a lot of capacity to actually address these environmental and social concerns. But in the world today, the situation is different. The situation has changed. Nowadays, if you take a look at a lot of surveys, trust in government has gone down. And the ability of government to address these concerns has also gone down. So later on, what we had was the coining of the term ESG by a gentleman who was working at the United Nations. This happened in 2004. And when we had the COP21 conference in Paris in 2015, that's when people started asking the question, what can businesses do to advance sustainability? What can they do to address climate concerns? And that's when we had the rise of ESG investing. So from 2015 to 2020, a lot of focus on ESG investing, but also some skepticism started to come in. You may remember the Wirecard scandal, which is a German company, and in 2020, it was reporting fantastic results, but it wasn't being accurate in its results. And even when it comes to ESG, its ESG ratings were moderately good, but still the company failed. Similarly for DWS, an asset management company, it was overstating the ESG credentials of a number of the different funds that it manages. So this is where you start to see some of the controversy around ESG coming in. Later on, in 2022, we had the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment. They wrote a paper about how a lot of these venture capital firms, there's no consistency in terms of how they report ESG. And I would say over the last few years, we've seen a significant uptick when it comes to the use of AI for ESG. Now, it's important to note that ESG is not just about doing good, a pious desire to change the world. It's about business performance. It's about realizing that there are real risks and opportunities when it comes to these factors. So a company that prioritizes ESG can improve the talent that it hires, it can open new markets, and so forth. Whereas a company that does not can suffer significant backlash when it comes from the public. It may not be able to attract a lot of investment. So there's a lot of benefit when it comes to ESG, top-line growth, less regulatory oversight, and so forth. Now, by incorporating ESG into business decisions, it's possible to address the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So what you're seeing on the left is a chart which shows you the 17 UN SDGs and also shows the different ESG factors that are at play for each of those SDGs. So for instance, a company that's addressing carbon footprint is also indirectly addressing the UN SDG 7 and 13. Similarly, when you speak about a company with good waste management practices, recycling, speak about the circular economy, it will be addressing SDG 12. Same thing for ethical supply chains, responsible sourcing, taking a look at fair labor practices. By doing so, having these sort of business practices, a company will also address SDG 8. So it's important to realize that there are lots of complexities when it comes to ESG. So I've spoken about a lot of the backlash, some of the greenwashing, where a lot of organizations overstate their ESG credentials. But there's also green hushing as well, where some companies are underreporting a lot of the efforts that they are making in terms of ESG because they fear a lot of the backlash, right? So there are all sorts of challenges. When it comes to standardization of reporting, that's another big challenge when it comes to ESG, as well as marketing versus genuine impact. So this is where we start to turn to AI, how AI can address a lot of these challenges that we find when it comes to ESG. So a lot of business leaders are prioritizing AI and sustainability when it comes to their business strategies. 88% of CEOs have reported existing or planned capital investments when it comes to AI-driven products and services. 38% of CEOs have reported that they're going to prioritize sustainability issues when making capital allocation decisions. And 65% of CEOs say more is needed to address the social, ethical, and criminal risks that are involved in a new AI-fueled future. So the question then becomes, how can AI address these ESG challenges? So there are four main categories that I would like to highlight. The first has to do with data collection and analysis. So for instance, one can do some intelligent document processing. You can go through lots of structured and unstructured documents to extract information that is related to ESG. It could be utility bills, it could be some sort of regulation that's just been passed, and so forth. And also to do some sort of KPI modeling. So for instance, if you think about Scope 3 emissions, one can go through databases like the US EEIO database and extract information on different products and their impact when it comes to carbon footprint. So that's mostly to do with gathering evidence. So what happens next once you've got this evidence? This is where the reporting and insights comes into play. So generative AI has got a big part to play in this case. So once you've got the evidence, you can construct it into some sort of narrative which is coherent, which can then fuel decision-making. So for instance, you could see that there's some sort of anomaly in terms of energy consumption within an organization, and then you can start to make certain decisions in terms of how to address those anomalies. When it comes to governance and risk management, so in 2023, for example, there's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which came in force in the European Union, and there are other laws that are also in the pipeline, such as the Due Diligence Directive. So if you've got AI systems that are consistently monitoring what's happening in terms of new legislation, new policies, regulations that a company has to adhere to, you can very quickly pick that up and see how well your organization is doing in terms of complying with all of these different regulations. Then there's stakeholder communication and engagement. So in your companies, there are lots of people who are speaking about ESG concerns either within the company or outside of the company. So you can actually do some social listening using AI to detect a lot of this activity and to see how different ESG campaigns are being received. Okay. So we've gone from these categories. Now let's take a look at some use cases according to the three different ESG factors. So first of all, let's consider the environmental factor. A lot of work can be done in terms of energy management, taking a look at the amount of energy that's been consumed, optimizing it, purchasing energy from different suppliers who are providing renewable energy based on certain parts of the day. Then there's climate monitoring. So nowadays, a lot of organizations, when they're planning their infrastructure developments, for instance, they avoid certain coastal areas that are going to be affected by sea level rise. And you can actually use AI to actually monitor these sort of cases. You speak about deforestation monitoring. So this can be very useful when it comes to identifying certain risks within the supply chain. On the social side, lots that can be done in terms of financial inclusion, particularly for a financial institution, taking a look at fair lending practices, health and well-being, if one works at a healthcare company, just to take a look at different groups who perhaps are not being serviced in the right way. Similarly, when it comes to employee discrimination, fair labor practices, this can be detected using AI. On the governance side, I've already spoken about CSRD and the Due Diligence Directive. So these are some of the use cases that can be explored. Now, let's go further. There are also some tools that are being developed. So if you consider a lot of the large technology companies, some consumer internet companies, they are starting to develop certain tools that can be used to monitor progress when it comes to ESG. So for instance, I remember when I was at IBM, my team worked on a product called the Environmental Intelligence Suite, contributing to that particular project. IBM also purchased this company called Envisi, which actually helps to ingest different types of information just to see how well a company is doing in terms of its ESG commitments. Microsoft has got Project ESG Lake, which is busy working on, and I'm sure it's going to release a product in line with that soon. Salesforce has got the Net Zero Cloud. Similarly, there's a lot of work that's happening in terms of AI tools for ESG from the startup space. So there's one startup called Brink, which is doing really interesting work in this area. So they've realized that 80% of ESG data is found in PDFs, is found in emails, is found in news articles, and so forth. So they've created tools that can actually ingest data from all of these non-traditional sources of information, and then you can actually get all sorts of reports. They use generative AI and different techniques like RAG that some of you may be aware of to actually extract information regarding different ESG topics. There's also Clarity AI, which has been doing amazing work. It's got a comprehensive suite for ESG. It can ingest lots and lots of different sources of information. It's got information from over 70,000 companies, over 400,000 funds, and over 400 governments. This is at the national and subnational level. So now let's take a look at some case studies. Here in Russia, Sberbank has been doing some really interesting work when it comes to ESG. They've been looking at how they can efficiently assess ESG risks from unstructured text. They created a solution using natural language processing called ESG-ify, and this can actually analyze Russian and English texts and do some topic modeling and extract different topics and relate them to different ESG commitments. And this has been really useful in terms of enhancing decision making. There's also Gazprom. I saw this study from MDPI, and they're doing some work also when it comes to addressing ESG challenges, optimizing resource use, and improving ESG reporting. And across the two different companies, you can see that there are some certain common themes when it comes to AI-driven optimization, when it comes to innovation and sustainability through AI. There are also some other examples from further afield. So for instance, Baker Hughes, it partnered with a company called C3 AI to actually develop a solution for materiality assessment. So some people may say there's some double materiality, so a company affects the planet and the planet affects the company. So they had seen that traditionally, when they're doing these materiality assessments, they would hire a team of analysts. They'd go away for several months, analyze all sorts of documents, and then at the end of the day, come up with some sort of ESG report. So they were asking the question, how can we speed up the process? And this is what they did together with C3 AI, and they were able to bring down the time it takes to come up with these ESG reports from several months just to 9 weeks. So that's a massive improvement. There's also Rerig Pacific, which partnered with a company called Flex Zero to also take a look at how its Scope 3 emissions are improving over time, or how they're changing in some sort of way. And they were doing some text extraction, taking a look at different utility invoices, and at the end of the day, they were able to speed up that process. There was less subjectivity, more consistency in terms of how they were reporting. But of course, there are more solutions, right? Not just the companies that I've spoken about. If you consider companies like Siemens, they've been looking at managing smarter grids. They've been able to reduce costs by some $3 million annually. If you think about different industries like H&M, they've been designing sustainable fashion. They've been able to reduce fabric waste by some 35%. And of course, there have been significant cost savings of over $1 million per year. There's also the example of Google DeepMind, which has been optimizing usage in data centers. You may be aware that data centers consume a massive amount of energy, so they were able to save some $1 billion annually through using AI, different reinforcement learning techniques. And there are several other examples, like Patagonia, Acquai, Breeze Technologies, and so forth. So, in as much as there's a lot of opportunity to use AI to address these ESG concerns, I think it's important to remind ourselves to follow a responsible approach when it comes to addressing these concerns. So I think it's important to remind ourselves that there's an issue of bias and fairness. So if poor data is used to train these models, then they're going to be poor outcomes. It's important, especially from an ESG perspective, when dealing with regulators, when dealing with central banks who are increasingly placing demands in terms of ESG reporting, that there is some sort of explainability in place. Data security and privacy is another one. I think cybersecurity is going to be one of the issues of this decade, and a lot of sensitive information is being used to train a lot of these models, which are used to address a lot of the ESG concerns. Then there's human oversight and accountability. So, in as much as we refer to AI as artificial intelligence, I think it's important for us to realize that this is a new form of intelligence. Machine intelligence is somewhat distinct from how we as humans think, and we should consider how to bring the best of how humans assess things, as well as how machine intelligence work, so that there's always a human in the loop when it comes to a lot of the different decisions and recommendations that AI systems are making. So there are lots of different recommendations that I've got on this slide here when it comes to having these diverse data sets, doing tests for explainable AI. Nowadays, there are all sorts of toolkits that you can integrate into development processes to check just how explainable these AI systems are. Data privacy and security, there are several techniques that can be used. You think about confidential computing, homomorphic encryption, and so forth, which will help to protect an organization going into the future. And then also in terms of human oversight and accountability. Okay, so now let's wrap things up. We've spoken about ESG, put things into context. We've gone through the journey of how these ESG topics have evolved over time. We've taken a look at different categories that can be used to develop AI solutions, as well as the different use cases, and gone through some case studies. So just to wrap things up, I think it's important to underscore that ESG and AI are intertwined, right? ESG is here to stay, and AI will play a crucial role when it comes to helping companies to navigate the complexities of ESG. So the convergence of ESG and AI is a defining moment for business, and ESG is not a fad. It's not something that's just going to go away. It's a fundamental shift in terms of how businesses operate, and AI is key to unlocking the potential of ESG. Secondly, I'll say that it's important to embrace AI for ESG. So investors need to continue demanding greater transparency when it comes to ESG reporting. Secondly, companies need to embrace the power of AI for ESG. And AI developers should also build responsible AI systems. And there are various ways to go about this. So thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Tapiwa Chiwewe, thank you very much for your presentation, for your performance. Now let's move on to the questions that we have from our audience. The first one is, it's very interesting. Is it possible that the use of AI for ESG sometimes contradicts the very goals of ESG, perhaps due to its high energy consumption? If so, how can we address this issue?
Yes, it is possible. So AI has got an energy problem. So the more we're training these large foundation models, these large language models, they cost tens to hundreds of millions of dollars to train, and they use a lot of energy. Nowadays, there are certain carbon accounting tools which have been developed, which you can use to see how much carbon footprint is being produced by training these models and also the inference as well. And there are different ways to address this. So I'll just highlight a few. So for instance, when it comes to training, the cost function, you can integrate the carbon footprint within the cost function. So as you're doing your training, you actually optimize for that. You can also use Bayesian optimization to fine-tune your hyperparameters, taking a look at what hyperparameters have worked very well in the past. So you can use Bayesian optimization for some of that, as well as going from grid search to random search in fine-tuning hyperparameters. I think that can also help in terms of reducing the energy consumption and being smart about the data that's used to train the models. You don't necessarily have to use the entire data set. You can use a representative subset of the data set when doing the training, which is going to result in less energy consumption. And also, there's a lot of interesting work that's happening on the hardware side in terms of more energy efficient chips. There are certain advances in terms of neuromorphic computing, for instance. It's really amazing. If you were to compare the human mind and the amount of energy that a human mind uses, it uses less than one household bulb, right? An incandescent lamp at least. That's the amount of energy a human mind uses. So we're still a long way to reaching that level of efficiency with AI systems. But I think there's a lot that can be done. I think about quantization techniques and a lot in this space.
Thank you. It's very sophisticated questions, not very simple. Thank you for explanation. The second question that we have from the audience is, artificial intelligence is becoming an increasingly important part of our lives, changing approaches to work, automation, and interaction with technology. Which professions, in your opinion, will disappear or transform first with the development of AI, and which ones will acquire new significance and why?
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? So when we think about the impact of AI and automation, you can think about when ATMs were introduced. A lot of people were concerned that there's going to be a loss in jobs. In the 4 decades after the introduction of ATMs, the number of bank branches actually increased. The reason is that it became cheaper to open a bank branch, and you needed fewer people at individual branches. And overall, what happened is that there were actually more bank tellers and people who were employed in the industry. So sometimes there's a bit of a counter-intuition in terms of what's going to happen. Now, an interesting thing is happening when it comes to AI and the workplace. In the past, a lot of automation targeted blue-collar workers. But nowadays, we've got these foundation models, and they're starting to impact more white-collar workers, right? So this is a fundamental shift. But that doesn't mean that a lot of occupations are going to disappear. I think the nature of work is going to change. So if you consider a radiologist, for example, you could say that an AI system can analyze MRIs, X-rays, and so forth at superhuman accuracy, which is true. That's what we're observing. But a radiologist does more than just interpret images. They also consult with patients. They speak with other radiologists, right, in terms of treatment regimes and so forth. So if you consider a job as a collection of different tasks, you have to look at the different tasks within a job, and as automation and AI affect certain tasks, what's going to happen is that some of the other tasks are going to increase in value. So this is what they call the O-ring theory of economic development, for those of you who are interested. So I think there are going to be new occupations, definitely. A lot of occupations are going to be impacted in different ways, and we have to be prepared for this future. So if one was to take it to an extreme, so let's say that, okay, somehow we've got AI systems that can really take over a lot of different professions. I think what we need to do as society to get ready is we need to come up with a social compact for the age of AI. Similar to what happened at the turn of the agricultural age, going into the industrial age. That's when we had K through 12 education. Previously, people didn't go to school regularly, right? But with the rise of industrialization, that's when formal education was introduced all the way to university level. And I think for the age of AI, we need similar bold policies, which may include things like universal basic income, for instance. So I think there's a lot that can be done to prepare for this extreme case. But in the meantime, I think the reality is going to be somewhat in the middle of extreme scenarios. I think that's what's going to play out.
Thank you. Great challenge for every one of us. And let's continue, if you don't mind. In what part of business do you think artificial intelligence will be the most effective?
So when I think about artificial intelligence, I like to say that AI is the new IT. So if you think back some 30 years ago, IT was a back office function. Just a few people used to be specialized in IT. But later on, what happened is that everyone had to get some sort of IT skills. When it comes to using the internet, sending emails, using productivity tools, everyone across professions needed to become IT literate. And nowadays, if the IT system goes down, the business goes down. You can't send invoices. You can't communicate with your suppliers, your clients, and so forth. And there's an analogy to be drawn between IT and AI, which is why I say AI is the new IT. Similarly to what happened with the information revolution, in this age of AI, it's going to be important for everyone to become AI literate as it becomes more and more pervasive. And as a pervasive technology, a general purpose technology, by its very nature, it's going to affect all professions, all industries, all sectors. So the level in which it's going to affect them may differ. I think there's a certain level of inertia in terms of adoption of AI technologies. So typically, I think in the communication space, in IT and so forth, there'll be very little friction to adopt AI technologies. But ultimately, all industries, professions, and so forth are going to be affected. So everyone should become ready for the age of AI.
As for professions, we have just got one more question. Does any one of your friends change their profession when understand from you that AI era is coming?
So, yes, there are. I think about my sister, for example. So she used to work in marketing, but now she's actually leading some AI product teams at the company that she works. So yes, there are some people that I know of who have actually done some sort of career pivot, and I think there's going to be more of this. So AI is really going to become quite fundamental, but I think there will still be some people with deep skills in AI. If you think about the challenges that we face with AI today, some of the challenges around the energy consumption, some of the challenges around understanding, reasoning, and learning, the challenges when it comes to chain of thought reasoning, really taking that to the next level, multi-agent systems. There's a lot that still needs to happen on the science side of AI. A lot of the advances today are based off of certain scaling laws. If you think about the large language models, right, it's mostly engineering that's taking place, and the scaling laws have got no sign of slowing down. So we can just use more GPUs, more energy, we'll get better and better AI systems. But there's still work to be done on the AI science, on the hardware for AI. So I think there'll still be a need for deep AI skills. But nonetheless, I think a lot of people will need to pick up different skills across the board.
Dr. Tapiwa Chiwewe, thank you very much. Thank you for your interesting answers. Thank you very much. Applause to the speaker.
I would like to remind you about the companies who contributed to making AIJ 2024 happen. The general partner, DOM-RF, our special partner, Yandex, the Russian Direct Investment Fund, our investment partner, that has been a consistent partner of the conference since 2018. Sibur, a partner who once again supported AI Journey this year. Our strategic partners, Kaspersky Lab, T-Bank, and Navio. And a partner of the conference, Rusagro Group. Thank you very much for your contribution. And now we're going to have a short break, and we will resume at 15:30 GMT+3.